beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. Within this video guide I will be sharing a very refreshing Saison recipe that is simply perfect for hot weather that I have named the Sunny Saison. This video has been designed as providing complete and pure information in an easy to understand format and will deliver everything you need to know without wasting anyone's time. So let's just get started. Let's begin by going through the steps in order, starting with a sneak preview of this recipe's vital statistics. This recipe offers an approximate 6% ABV and is very light in colour, as you can see, with an EBC of just 7.1. It is also not very bitter and offers something very easy drinking and refreshing. More on this later. This recipe, like all of my shared recipes, is written by me and can be found in full within the video's description, which is underneath the video window when viewed on a desktop computer. In keeping with all of my shared recipe, this recipe is very tried and tested, so brew with confidence. You will also find a link to the full recipe on Brewhouse, which can be used free of charge with some restrictions. I strongly suggest that your first steps will be to convert the recipe before ordering in your ingredients so that you're actually brewing the recipe as intended. I have an easy guide to doing this using Brewhouse on my channel as shown on screen now. Within this video this recipe is being brewed using a Gen 4 Brewster at 65 to the volume of 19 litres or approximately 5 US liquid gallons. But as part of the conversion process this can be scaled and shaped to suit your own brewing system and volume requirements. Recipe conversion is an essential part of the process for any shared recipe, but thankfully the conversion is easy when you know how. I also strongly recommend for the very best of results that you plan your water profile ahead, unless of course you're a beginner and then you'll be forgiven for skipping this step. It is important to do this in the future though, because after all beer is mostly water and its balance is important. Shown on screen is the water profile that I preferred in developing this recipe, which is found on Brewhouse. Brewhouse also has a very good documentation on how to use the software to make the necessary water changes easy too. Saison is certainly one of the more varied styles out there, but one thing that they all have in common is that both hop and grain flavours should be in relative harmony. This balanced profile will give you just that. Let's move on to the brew itself, and this begins with preheating your mash water to the first temperature step and then gradually adding your milled grain. You will note that more experienced brewers take their time with this step and ensure that all grains are wet and well stirred in before adding more. Truth be told, this process is the most important one during a brew because quite simply the outcome of it can either positively or negatively impact the rest of your brew, so it's a very important one to get right. This recipe has two mash steps as you can see on screen now. The first step at 67 will promote a medium fermentability, which will restrict your yeast from eating the sugars too dry, as this recipe is designed to have some extra residual sugar to promote better flavour and drinkability considering its flavours. This does not mean that it will taste sweet, it's just not going to be very dry as such. Let's now take a look at our fermentables. As you can see we have two different types of grain here which are added into our mash, whereas the Candi Sugar is added at the late boil stage, and I will talk more about this later. As I'm sure you've already noticed, this is a very simple grain bill consisting of mostly Pilsner malt, which will provide a crisp background, and then we have a relatively small amount of pale ale malt as a contrast. This is indeed very simple but ideal for a recipe such as this one where we want a light and easy malt flavour that can be built on by extra flavour additions within the boil. I am now moving on to the mash in step, which is when the first mash step timer of 1 hour starts. When you first start the mash the colour will be very light like this, but as time develops the results will start to darken, and this will be intensified further during the boil too. Here you can see the same mash but after the second mash step has started. This is perfectly normal and you will note that it will eventually get lighter during fermentation and then further lighter afterwards too when it becomes beer, though this can depend on the type of yeast used. After mash out I then did asparage manually by hand using a jug, ensuring that I covered all of the grain. It was then time for the boil. This one does not present much in the way of protein on top as you can see, but it is important to stir this in as per usual anyway to allow it all to drop to the bottom of your system and remove the top foam. So let's now look at the boil schedule. As you can see for this recipe I'm using the modern boil time of 30 minutes. For more information about this check out my video as shown on screen that runs through all of the details and how to convert those older recipes with 60-minute and 90-minute boil times. If you would rather boil for longer then simply match the first hop addition's IBU of 19 and all will be fine. though there is certainly much to recommend about the 30-minute boil time, so I will at least recommend that you try it at least once. As you will note, both of the hop additions for this recipe are Saaz, but actually you could sub these for other European hops like Hallertau or Mittelfrüh or anything else similar in fact. It will all work. I am showing the IBU levels on screen, and I also share the same in my recipe in the video's description. Please use recipe software like Brewfather to calculate the weight of the hops that you should use based on your hop's alpha acid percentage. Also at the 5 minutes to the end of the boil point, we have both lemon and orange peel additions for extra flavours that really push this one into extra flavourful and refreshing dimensions. Personally, I've been using prepared versions available in my local homebrew store, but you could create your own, ensuring that you do not include any of the pith. Just like you do with your hops, ensure that you give these a really good stir in to release their full flavour and aroma. You should pick up the aroma yourself as you do this while brewing, which is certainly a nice bonus. Then finally, at around the same timing, you should add your Candi Sugar. My footage with this brew did not record properly, so here is some previous footage of me using a hop spider to add in the Candi Sugar. This ensures that it does not burn on the bottom of the system and create a hard to clean mess. The timing of the Candi Sugar and the peels does not need to be precise. You just want to ensure that the peel is added at least 1 minute before the end of the boil, and that the Candi Sugar has dissolved before the end of the boil, and all will be good. I then called the wort using my counterflow chiller, and very soon it was time to start transfer into my fermenter, which in this case is the Brewable X2 Uni. I guess you could tell though if you saw my preview video, as nothing else is this shiny. As I cooled and transferred, there was this very nice aroma of orange and lemon coming from the brew, which certainly made the process very pleasant. My yeast of choice for this recipe is Lallamand's Farmhouse Saison yeast, which is a high attenuation bad boy that delivers some really nice tropical fruity flavours and aromas that sit very well with the orange and lemon in this recipe. I started my fermentation at 25 degrees Celsius for 3 days, and then moved the temperature up 1 degree Celsius per day over 5 days, and then hit 30 degrees Celsius. I kept the fermentation at 30 until I had a constant final gravity for 3 days, which I have to say did not take very long at all. Imperial measurements are shown on screen for those not familiar with Celsius. I did try one small test batch that started at the high end of this temperature range, but frankly the batches at 25 degrees Celsius were better tasting, so 25 degrees Celsius it stayed. If you want to, you could ferment this one under pressure, but certainly you would want to skip the first 3 to 4 days, otherwise you would lose out on all the flavours and aromas from this yeast, which certainly would be a shame. Let's now move on to the tasting. Let's now look at the end beer from this brew combined with my tasting notes, starting with a close-up look at the pour and then the same pour with a focus on the full glass. As you saw, the beer is quite a light gold on the pour, but a darker golden colour in bulk in the glass, as you would expect. The fresh white head finishes off the whole look very nicely, as you will see shortly. Because the Lallemand Farmhouse Saison yeast that I use with this recipe is a low attenuator, I decided to use gelatin to clean up the beer, and it was dropped quite clean at the point that you see it now, which is just after 7 days. You may wish to give the beer this helping hand too, if clarity in the look of the beer is very important to you within a minimal time. This beer has been under 12 psi of pressure, which is 0.83 bars for this time, and I'm also using this pressure for serving too. To follow my tasting notes, starting with aroma, which are written at the 3-week point, which is when this beer comes into a better drinking experience, though for the very best taste I would suggest waiting 6 weeks in total, if you can. The main differences being that the flavours will separate and become more identifiable and cleaner. Aroma. This beer has a very citrus aroma with an unmistakable spicy Saaz buzz to it, which makes it very inviting. In terms of flavour, this one is certainly very light and easy on entry, and from the middle point to the end you are dancing with tasty and clean orange and lemon, plus various background tropical fruits. The finish is easy with light levels of bitterness and that signature Saaz spice at the end. Here are my notes. As this is a Saison, the fruit flavours are not in your face like with an IPA, but are nicely intertwined with a refreshing and more subtle fruity drinking experience. There is also certainly a very big difference to the taste buds by using peels rather than hops to deliver these flavours. Most would describe it as a cleaner form of fruit that is more defined. My final impression here is that this is an easy drinking, refreshing farmhouse Saison that is certainly more fruity than usual, but without overdoing things to keep it easy and light. Do let myself and the community know what you think of this video guide, and also I would love to hear your tasting notes once you have brewed this one and have let it condition for a reasonable time. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!